blah 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 blah. A lot of people really don't quite know what dyspraxia is. And when someone does know what dyspraxia is, they don't really 100% know. The reason being is because the Dyspraxia Foundation doesn't really get a lot of, or any at all, funding from the government, meaning that no research can really be done. This does also mean that a lot of people who have dyspraxia go completely undiagnosed, and anyone who is diagnosed with dyspraxia, not a lot of, say, doctors or teachers really know how to deal with their patients or students, which I'm sure a lot of people who are roughly kind of my age or older would have a huge understanding as to what that really means. I was diagnosed with dyspraxia when I started attending university, so I was 18, turning 19 years old. I'd never heard of dyspraxia, and hardly anyone I knew had heard of dyspraxia either. And I don't blame yourselves if you're watching this video going, what on earth is dyspraxia? So as a short, dyspraxia is a disability, sort of, that affects your motor skills. It affects quite a large number of areas. I'll put a link to the Dyspraxia Foundation if you want to look a little bit more into it. The topic I want to talk about today, however, relates to food and how people with dyspraxia deal with different types of textures. Now, when it comes to food, it's always been a really frustrating process for myself. So what I mean by that is more based on the texture of the food. It doesn't matter whether I like the taste of it or I don't like the taste of it. It's definitely mostly based on the texture. So, for example, I really like the taste of cherries, but I can't eat cherries because they make me gag. The texture of them is completely off. I can't have them whatsoever. A good one to mention is that my mum used to make her own lentil soups, and I used to love the taste of the leek in the soup, but I didn't like the actual leek itself. So she would have like this massive sieve with all the normal ingredients, with the leek at the bottom so that they didn't mix, so that I could still have the great taste of the leek in the food without actually having the leek. I've managed to speak to a number of different people who have dyspraxia, and I've also managed to speak to a lot of parents who have children who have dyspraxia. And we've all come to the same topic in conversation when it comes to food, mostly being where food sits on the plate and where other food sit with the other foods. Does that make sense? So, for example, a lot of people will say this, so don't panic yourselves if you do this as well. It's quite common in a lot of people, but more specifically people with dyspraxia, and to much more of an extent. So with that bearing in mind, if, for example, you've got sausage, beans and mash on your plate, the one thing that cannot happen is the beans cannot touch the mash. So you tend to make a wall with the sausage. Same again if you've got chips and you've got something else, the ketchup can't touch the other food, and the ketchup can't be on the chips. It could be next to the chips but not on the chips. Or it would be some completely random foods that have the same textures, the same consistency, depending on where they are on the plate and depending on how you position the plate as well. I sometimes get very frustrated before I start my meal because I need to be able to position the plate a certain way, otherwise I cannot touch the food. Now, like I said, don't worry about this. A lot of people do this, even people who don't have dyspraxia. It's just one of those tics that everyone has. But one thing you have to understand is that people with dyspraxia is to a whole new level, to the point where it really, really frustrates them. And not kind of like, oh, God, my ketchup's touched the chips, there's my day ruined. It's kind of like, I can't eat that. I cannot eat that because there is too much of that specific food touching that specific food. Can't eat it. No. Doesn't matter how hungry you are or how non-hungry you are, it literally does ruin your day. The only way that I can say is the reason for that is because dyspraxia in some way is a slight form of autism. So by that I mean dyspraxia has autistic traits. So you have what's the word I'm looking for? The slight obsessive nature, where something has to be a certain way, otherwise it's not compatible with anything else. You're not able to progress. You have obsessions with certain things. This applies with other things outside of food. Just want to remind you that I'm no scientist. I don't have all the funding to do all this research. All I want to do is have a larger understanding of the disability that I have to deal with. I keep saying disability, but in my personal opinion, I don't see it as a disability. If anything, I see it more as an ability. I will have more videos to follow which will explain more why I think of it that way. If you're someone who deals with dyspraxia, or you have children who deal with dyspraxia, please do take a minute to subscribe and follow me on Twitter. I do plan to make a lot more videos about dyspraxia, and I would like to be able to have more discussions in the comments and on Twitter. I've also created a new email specifically for this topic. I want to be able to grow my knowledge, but to be able to do that, I need to be able to talk to people like yourselves, people who know people with dyspraxia, have children with dyspraxia, or yourself have dyspraxia. And if you're someone who's just looking to find out a little bit more about dyspraxia, then please don't be afraid to comment on this video, to tweet at me, or to send an email. All the links are down there in my trousers. Again, don't be afraid to message me. I'm not as scary as I look, and I don't bite. I will also have links in the description to the Dyspraxia Foundation. Okay, so I've been Krystalbella. Bye bye, bye bye, bye.